Lauren had always dreamed of setting foot on the vast, untamed lands of Africa. Ever since she was a little girl, she had been captivated by stories of wild safaris, towering mountains, and the mystery of the jungle. But this trip was more than just a childhood dream coming true. It was a search for healing. Months earlier, she had lost her younger brother in a tragic accident. He had been the one who shared with her a deep passion for wildlife photography. Their plan had always been to explore the African wilderness together, to capture moments others could only imagine. Now, standing alone at the edge of this vibrant but unforgiving jungle, Lauren felt both the weight of grief and the excitement of honoring the promise they made to each other. The first thing she noticed as she stepped off the jeep and onto the forest floor was the thick, humid air. It clung to her skin like a second layer, smelling of wet earth, sweet fruit, and the faint scent of blooming flowers. The sounds were overwhelming, yet enchanting. The constant chatter of distant birds, the rustle of leaves swaying gently in the breeze, and the occasional whooping call of unseen monkeys created a chaotic but mesmerizing orchestra. The jungle seemed alive, breathing, whispering, watching. Lauren tightened her grip on her camera, its weight around her neck feeling both comforting and heavy with expectation. Her guide, a tall, weathered man named Juma, moved with confidence, hacking away at overgrown vines with his machete. His presence was reassuring, but his stern demeanor left Lauren slightly on edge. Before entering, Juma had gathered Lauren and the other few tourists around and gave them clear instructions. He warned them about the dangers hidden behind the beauty of the jungle, emphasizing how unpredictable wildlife could be. "Respect the jungle," he said, his deep voice echoing in the silence that followed. "And remember, if you meet a gorilla, play dead. Do not scream, do not run. They are the kings here." At first, the journey seemed almost magical. The deeper they went, the more vibrant everything became. Bright red and yellow birds darted through the trees like streaks of living paint. A troop of playful monkeys swung overhead, chattering and screeching in what seemed like laughter. Lauren couldn't resist snapping photos. Each click of the shutter capturing colors and textures she had only ever seen in documentaries. She was completely absorbed by the beauty, momentarily forgetting the warnings and her lingering sadness. For a while, the jungle felt like a gentle friend welcoming her. Yet, as the sun rose higher and the shadows shifted, an unease began to creep into Lauren's chest. The canopy overhead thickened, casting strange patterns of light and darkness across the forest floor. The playful calls of the monkeys became distant, replaced by the rustle of leaves stirred by the wind, or was it something else? Lauren wasn't sure. Her eyes scanned the underbrush nervously, catching nothing but the occasional flicker of movement, too quick to identify. Juma kept leading them forward, occasionally glancing back to check on his group. He seemed calm, but there was a tension in the way he gripped his machete a little tighter now. Lauren noticed small but unsettling details. Some branches looked freshly snapped, as if something large had passed through recently. Faint footprints, deep and wide, marked the muddy ground in places. Lauren's photographer instinct wanted to stop and document them, but the pit growing in her stomach told her to keep moving. Her mind drifted back to the locals she had met at the small village on the outskirts of the reserve. They had been warm and welcoming, but when she mentioned venturing deep into the jungle, some had exchanged worried glances. An old woman had even grasped her hand and whispered in broken English, "Jungle spirits watching." At the time, Lauren had dismissed it as folklore, but now, every snapping twig and rustling leaf felt like eyes following her. Despite the growing anxiety, Lauren also felt a strange thrill. The jungle wasn't just beautiful, it was alive and unpredictable. The very thing that scared her was also what made it irresistible. This mixture of fascination and fear was something she hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe it was what her brother had loved most about exploring the unknown. Perhaps, deep down, that was why she had come not just to take pictures, but to feel alive again. The deeper they went, the quieter the jungle became. Even Juma noticed it. His pace slowed, and he began to look around more cautiously. Lauren, heart pounding, followed closely behind, careful with each step. Up ahead, a group of colourful birds suddenly burst from the trees, their wings flapping wildly as they scattered in all directions. Lauren froze. She could have sworn she heard a low guttural growl from somewhere beyond the thicket. Her eyes searched the dense greenery, but nothing appeared. Lauren's fingers instinctively tightened around her camera as her breath quickened. Was it just an animal going about its day, or was it something watching them, hiding, deciding? Lauren couldn't tell. The others in the group seemed oblivious, busy chatting quietly or focusing on the trail. But Lauren knew. Something was out there. Something was close. As they continued, the sounds of the jungle seemed to shift once more, the usual harmony replaced by an unnerving silence. Lauren's instincts screamed that they were no longer alone. Lauren had always prided herself on staying close to the group during excursions, but when her eyes caught the sudden flutter of a vibrant blue bird perched just beyond a dense patch of trees, her instincts as a photographer overpowered caution. The bird, its feathers shimmering with hues of sapphire and emerald, seemed almost otherworldly against the rich green backdrop. Without fully realizing it, she stepped off the beaten path, weaving her way carefully through the undergrowth, her eyes locked on the delicate creature. Each step was measured, her mind focused on capturing the perfect frame. But when she finally raised her camera and pressed the shutter, the bird took flight, vanishing into the emerald canopy above. Only then did Lauren realize how far she had wandered. The sounds of the others were faint now, muffled by layers of trees and foliage. She turned slowly, expecting to see the familiar trail or perhaps Juma's reassuring figure. Instead, she was met with an unsettling stillness. The vibrant chorus of the jungle seemed to have been silenced, replaced by an eerie calm that pressed heavily on her chest. Lauren took a cautious step backward, her boots sinking slightly into the damp earth, and scanned her surroundings. The air itself felt thicker, the leaves motionless, as if the very forest was holding its breath. Then, without warning, a rustle in the bushes made her spin around. From behind the dense curtain of vines emerged a towering dark figure. At first, her mind refused to process it. It wasn't until the figure fully stepped into the dappled light that the reality of it crashed over her like a tidal wave. There, no more than 15 feet away, stood a massive gorilla. Its broad chest rose and fell with slow, deliberate breaths. Muscles rippled beneath its dark, bristling fur, and its arms, thick as tree trunks, hung loosely by its sides. Yet it was the eyes that truly paralyzed Lauren, deep, intelligent, and filled with something she couldn't quite place. Anger, curiosity, or perhaps something beyond human understanding. Time seemed too slow. Lauren's body stiffened, her mind instantly recalling Juma's warning, like a sharp whisper in her ear. If you meet a gorilla, play dead. Every fibre of her being screamed at her to run, to flee from this living wall of power, but her instincts, fueled by fear and the guide's voice, forced her to drop to the forest floor. Heart hammering, breath trembling, she lay still on the cold, damp earth, pressing her cheek against the mossy ground. The gorilla took a heavy step forward, then another, the ground subtly vibrating beneath its weight. Lauren clenched her jaw to stifle a whimper. She could feel the forest watching. Even the trees seemed frozen, unwilling to betray her with a stray falling leaf. The gorilla's breathing grew louder, each exhale warm and thick, washing over her like steam. Its shadow loomed over her motionless body, and then, terrifyingly, she felt the light touch of its enormous fingers on her shoulder. The sensation sent a shock through her, every muscle in her body wanting to flinch, but she forced herself to remain limp. The gorilla's fingers were surprisingly gentle, brushing against her jacket, tracing the curve of her arm as if trying to understand what she was. Lauren's heart threatened to burst from her chest, thudding so violently she was certain the creature could hear it. Cold sweat trickled down her back, soaking her clothes as she fought to control her breathing. Every second stretched unbearably, the weight of fear pressing down on her with the same intensity as the gorilla's hand. The gorilla circled her slowly, its massive feet disturbing the soft forest floor. Lauren's eyes, half-lidded to maintain the illusion of lifelessness, caught glimpses of its form. The sheen of its fur, the way it examined her with both caution and curiosity. It sniffed the air deeply, its nostrils flaring as it lowered its face closer, so close that Lauren could feel its breath tickling her cheek. The scent was earthy, primal, wild, a reminder of how completely out of place she was in this ancient wilderness. Inside, Lauren's thoughts spiraled. Was this the end? Would she be another tragic story, another tourist who had underestimated the jungle? Images of her brother flashed before her eyes, his laughter, the late nights planning this very trip, his voice telling her that life was too short to be afraid. She thought of their parents, of the unfinished album of photographs they had dreamed of completing together. Was this how it would end, alone and helpless, beneath the indifferent gaze of nature? And yet, as the gorilla continued to inspect her, Lauren noticed something strange. The creature's touch, though heavy, was deliberate and careful. Its breathing, though strong, was calm. There was no immediate aggression, no violent display of dominance. Instead, the gorilla seemed to be studying her, as if trying to decide what exactly she was and whether she posed any threat at all. The longer the seconds dragged on, the more Lauren's fear mixed with confusion. Why wasn't it attacking? Why did it seem so composed? This wasn't the wild, uncontrollable beast she had feared. This was something else entirely, an intelligent, conscious being. Her instincts told her not to move, but her mind flooded with questions. Could it sense her fear? Could it somehow understand her vulnerability? The gorilla shifted its weight, crouching beside her, one massive hand resting gently on her back. Lauren's body remained still, but inside she was trembling uncontrollably. She could hear its breathing slowing, could almost feel it thinking, calculating. She realized she was in the presence of something that was far more than just an animal. It was making a decision. As the minutes passed, or were they hours, Lauren's world became a swirl of heartbeat echoes, the scent of the forest floor, and the profound nearness of this mysterious creature. She was trapped in a fragile stillness where one sudden movement, one panicked breath, could mean everything. And yet, deep within her terror, Lauren felt the faintest glimmer of something unexpected awe. Before Lauren could fully process what was happening, the gorilla, with a sudden yet strangely delicate motion, slid one of its massive arms beneath her and effortlessly lifted her from the forest floor. Its grip was firm but not painful, as if it knew exactly how much pressure a human body could withstand. Lauren's breath caught in her throat. Every instinct screamed to struggle, but terror, coupled with the faint glimmer of hope that this might not be an act of aggression, kept her frozen. Suspended in its powerful arms, she could feel the immense strength beneath its fur, but also a surprising gentleness, as if the creature were carrying something precious and fragile. The gorilla moved slowly and purposefully, stepping over tangled roots and ducking beneath thick branches with practiced ease. As it carried her deeper into the jungle, Lauren's head rested against its chest, and she could hear the steady, slow rhythm of its heartbeat, calm and unhurried, in stark contrast to her own frantic pulse. The jungle around them transformed as they ventured further from the familiar paths. The air grew heavier, rich with the scent of damp earth and wildflowers. Vines draped like curtains from towering trees, swaying slightly with the breeze. Every so often, shafts of golden light pierced the canopy, illuminating dust particles that danced like tiny spirits. Lauren could do nothing but observe. The journey was surreal, as if she were floating in a dream. Occasionally, she glimpsed flashes of small animals darting away through the underbrush, startled by the passing giant. A crystal-clear stream crossed their path, and the gorilla carefully stepped through it, not jostling her even once. Lauren noticed details she had never seen in her short time in the jungle, the subtle patterns on the leaves, the vibrant red of orchids clinging to the trees, and the faint chirps of hidden creatures who remained safely tucked away. Despite the lingering fear, Lauren began to notice something else. The gorilla's every movement was measured, deliberate, never rough or careless. There was no malice in its grip, no urgency in its stride. It wasn't dragging her as prey, nor displaying dominance. It carried her as one might carry a lost child or a fragile treasure. Slowly, Lauren's thoughts shifted. The beast she had feared so much seemed almost protective. Yet, how could that be? The very idea defied everything she had ever learned about gorillas in the wild. They finally arrived at a hidden part of the jungle where the trees opened up to reveal the mouth of a cave, partially concealed by thick ferns and trailing vines. To Lauren's surprise, the place didn't feel threatening. Instead, it exuded a strange sense of safety, like a secret shelter known only to a few. The gorilla gently lowered her to the cave floor, its massive hands adjusting her as if to ensure she was comfortable. Then, without making a sound, it turned and sat at the entrance of the cave, its broad back facing her, shoulders rising and falling with calm, steady breaths. Lauren remained motionless for a long moment, too shocked to move. Slowly, cautiously, she sat up and leaned against the cave wall, keeping her eyes locked on the gorilla. From where she sat, she could see the outline of its face, partly illuminated by the soft jungle light. Its eyes were fixed on the forest outside, scanning with quiet vigilance. Lauren's breathing slowed slightly as she watched, trying to make sense of what she was witnessing. This creature, this so-called savage beast, wasn't holding her captive. It wasn't threatening her at all. It was standing guard. The longer she watched, the more Lauren's perception unraveled. Gone was the image of a mindless predator. Instead, she saw the undeniable signs of intelligence and awareness. There was something ancient and wise in the gorilla's posture, in the way its eyes darted and narrowed as if reading the wind itself. It didn't seem worried, but it was clearly protecting the cave and, by extension, Lauren. As the hours crept by, the sky outside shifted from deep green to warm orange, and finally to a rich indigo as night took hold. The jungle transformed once again, its sounds deepening and softening. The daytime calls of birds gave way to the haunting cries of nocturnal animals. Fireflies began to glow in patches, drifting lazily through the air like floating stars. From her place in the cave, Lauren could see the forest shimmer under the soft glow of moonlight filtering through the trees. In the quiet, Lauren began to reflect. She thought of her brother and the countless nights they had spent stargazing as kids, whispering about wild adventures they would someday embark on. She remembered the promise they made to see the world's hidden wonders together. Tears welled in her eyes as she realized she was living that very adventure. Though, in a way, neither of them could have ever imagined. She wondered if, in some strange way, this gorilla had sensed something in her. A vulnerability, a connection, or perhaps it was simply the unpredictable will of nature. Either way, she couldn't deny the bond forming between them. Every glance, every careful movement from the gorilla hinted at something more than instinct. Lauren realized that perhaps the greatest danger wasn't the jungle itself, but misunderstanding it. As night deepened, Lauren's fear softened into awe. She listened closely to the nighttime symphony of insects, distant howls, and the rhythmic rise and fall of the gorilla's breathing. Despite the cold creeping in, despite the dirt beneath her, and despite everything she thought she knew about survival in the wild, she felt strangely safe. The gorilla, still unmoving at the cave's mouth, seemed less like a captor and more like a sentinel, a guardian, watching over her in the heart of the unknown. For the first time since the encounter began, Lauren's body relaxed. She pulled her knees to her chest, gazing up at the fractured canopy above, where stars twinkled faintly through the leaves. Alone in the middle of the vast, perilous jungle, with only a silent guardian keeping watch, Lauren closed her eyes and allowed herself, for the first time, to breathe. It was the faint echo of distant voices that first stirred Lauren from the trance-like state she had fallen into. At first, she thought it might be her imagination, the sounds blending with the nocturnal calls of the jungle. But as she strained her ears, hope bloomed in her chest. There were people calling her name. Their voices were cautious, urgent, yet muffled by the dense vegetation. Lauren shifted slightly, glancing toward the entrance of the cave where the gorilla still sat, its posture unchanged, eyes scanning the forest with calm vigilance. The gorilla's ears twitched at the sound too, and for a brief moment, Lauren feared it might react aggressively. But instead, it remained perfectly still, as though it understood what the voices meant. Lauren's heartbeat quickened, this time not with fear, but with the overwhelming relief of knowing she might be saved. She opened her mouth to call out, but hesitated, glancing at the gorilla. She didn't want to startle it. Instead, she waited, trusting that the rescuers would follow the trail. Minutes later, Juma emerged cautiously from the thick underbrush, his face frozen in disbelief, as his eyes fell upon the incredible sight before him. Behind him, a few members of the search party stood stunned, mouths agape, staring at the scene they could hardly comprehend. There was Lauren, alive but visibly shaken, sitting inside a cave, guarded not by a hostile predator, but by a gorilla who looked as composed as a sentry. No one dared to speak at first, fearing the slightest sound might provoke the creature. Juma slowly raised a hand, signaling the others to stay back, and stepped forward with deliberate calm. The gorilla turned its head, briefly locking eyes with him, then shifted its gaze back to Lauren. It made no move to retreat nor to attack. Its breathing remained steady, its towering form relaxed yet alert. Lauren, sensing the delicacy of the situation, rose slowly to her feet, every movement controlled and gentle. As she took a hesitant step forward, the gorilla tilted its head, watching her with those deep, knowing eyes. The rescuers, still wary, approached cautiously. Lauren could see the amazement in their faces, the confusion mingled with awe. One of them reached out, offering his hand to her, and with a trembling breath she took it. They gently guided her away from the cave's interior, inch by inch, never turning their backs on the gorilla. Lauren's eyes never left the creature, and to her astonishment it remained where it was, making no attempt to stop them. When she was just a few feet from the cave's entrance, the gorilla slowly stood. For a brief second, a ripple of fear passed through the rescuers, but Lauren raised a hand subtly, signaling them to remain calm. The gorilla stepped forward, not in aggression, but as if to get one last look at her. Its eyes locked onto hers, and in that silent exchange, Lauren felt as though entire volumes of understanding passed between them. There was no rage, no resentment, only acceptance, and perhaps a quiet sadness. Lauren swallowed hard as tears welled up. "Thank you," she whispered under her breath, unsure if the gorilla could possibly understand. But part of her believed it did. The creature blinked slowly, took a step back, and with a final glance at the group, turned away. Without a sound, it melted into the jungle, its towering form disappearing behind the curtain of vines and leaves, as though it had never been there. The rescuers stood frozen for a long moment, processing what they had just witnessed. Lauren, still holding back tears, knew deep inside that she had just experienced something most people would never believe, let alone understand. She was escorted carefully back through the jungle, the familiar path now strangely different. The trees, the vines, the sounds, everything seemed softer, more sacred, as if the jungle itself had revealed one of its deepest secrets. When Lauren returned to the village, word of her survival spread quickly. But when she shared the details of her story, the gorilla, the cave, the undeniable sense of protection she had felt, the villagers listened with wide eyes and knowing nods. Juma, though still visibly shaken, backed every word she said. News outlets eventually caught wind of the incredible tale, and soon Lauren's story was known far beyond the borders of the village. Some people called it a miracle, Others debated whether it was simply a rare behavioral anomaly. But for Lauren, it was neither a miracle nor a fluke. It was a reminder that the world still held mysteries beyond human comprehension. Debates raged about the intelligence and emotional depth of gorillas, about the unseen bonds between humans and animals, and about the capacity of the wild to protect rather than destroy. Yet no amount of scientific discussion could capture the silent connection Lauren had felt in the presence of that gorilla. Weeks passed, and Lauren eventually returned home. The comforts of civilization felt oddly hollow after what she had experienced. She often found herself staring at the photos she had managed to take before the encounter, wondering if she would ever truly be able to describe what had happened. No image, no sentence could ever fully convey the profound mixture of fear, awe, and gratitude she had felt. One quiet afternoon, unable to resist the pull in her chest, Lauren found herself back on the edge of the jungle. She stood beneath the towering trees, listening to the wind whisper through the leaves, hoping, perhaps foolishly, that the gorilla might reappear. But the jungle remained still, revealing nothing. Yet, as she turned to leave, Lauren smiled softly. Whether or not she saw the creature again didn't matter. Somewhere out there, deep in the wild heart of Africa, she knew her silent guardian was watching.